Okay, let's unpack this. If you live in the UK, you definitely know the feeling. It's that familiar escalating dread when the mail drops and there's another brightly colored, aggressively worded envelope from TV licensing.
Mm.
They start off polite, but then they move to these official-looking declarations, and before you know it, they're implying that if you don't comply, like right now, you're facing imminent prosecution.
It is a deliberate strategy. It
Yeah.
absolutely is. The correspondence is, well, it's designed to evoke fear. And that fear prompts immediate and often, completely unnecessary compliance.
Exactly, and that's why we're doing this. You, our listener, shared a fantastic stack of sources on the Communications Act 2003 and consumer protection laws because you want to stop just reacting to these letters and start, understanding the legal reality.
And that's what we're here for. Our mission today is a proper deep dive into the legal facts of TV licensing in the UK. We want to give you the tools to understand precisely when a license is truly required and, this is the crucial part, what your rights are when you get one of those letters.
We need to separate the myths, the fear, from the correspondence, from the cold, hard, statutory facts.
Exactly. And we're going to focus on two fundamental legal pillars. First, the statutory framework itself, which very clearly defines what the offense actually is.
Okay.
And second, and this is arguably more empowering for you, the burden of proof, which defines who is actually responsible for proving that an offense has even occurred. Understanding these two things, it completely changes the balance of power.
So let's jump straight in with that first pillar, the central question that so many people get wrong. Under Section 363 of the Communications Act 2003, what specific, narrow activities actually trigger the need to buy a TV license?
The law is remarkably specific, which is actually your key piece of protection here. A license is required for only two defined actions. First one, watching or recording live television program services as they're being broadcast.
Right, as they're being broadcast. So live.
Yes, content you watch at the same time or very nearly the same time as it's being transmitted.
So if I'm watching the evening news or a live football match exactly when it's on air, that's a tick. I need a license. But what about the second specific action? I think this is the one that really catches people out.
It is. The second action is the use of BBC iPlayer. This is a specific exception written into the law, and critically, this includes both live streaming on iPlayer and all on-demand or catch-up use of the BBC's service.
Ah, so any use of iPlayer.
Any use at all. If you use BBC iPlayer for any purpose, a license is required, full stop.
That distinction is so important. So if I watch, say, The Great British Bake Off live on Channel 4, I need a license. If I watch it 3 days later on the ITVX app, I don't. But if I watch an episode of EastEnders on demand on BBC iPlayer, then I do need a license.
Precisely.
Why is the BBC service singled out like that?
It all comes down to the BBC's funding model, which is, of course, the license fee. When the law was updated for streaming, Parliament specifically included the consumption of BBC content on its main platform, iPlayer, to keep that funding model intact. It's an anomaly, but it's a very clear legal one.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting then. Because that very small, very specific definition of what needs a license creates this huge list of things that, well, don't. What activities are explicitly exempt?
Pretty much everything else. Any activity that falls outside of watching live broadcasts or using BBC iPlayer is legally exempt. The sources confirm that viewing on-demand or catch-up services other than BBC iPlayer does not trigger the requirement.
Let's give some specific practical examples because I think a lot of people just assume if you have a smart TV, you automatically need a license.
And that's absolutely not the case. If you are only streaming content using services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, or Apple TV, you do not need a license.
Okay.
If you're watching clips on YouTube that aren't live or using your TV to watch a DVD or even playing video games on a console, none of that requires a TV license. The device you use is completely irrelevant. It's all about the content and the timing.
So the main takeaway from the legal framework is protection through specificity. If you only use modern on-demand streaming outside of the BBC world, the law just doesn't apply to you.
Now that we've nailed down the offense, let's look at enforcement. This is the bit that feels, terrifying to people. And this is where the burden of proof comes in. And it completely shifts the dynamic in your favor.
Right, the burden of proof. We hear that term a lot, but what does it actually mean for someone getting those escalating red letters in the mail?
It means that the entire responsibility, 100% of it, to prove that you've broken the law rests with the prosecuting authority. That's TV licensing acting for the BBC. You, as the individual, are not required to prove a negative. You don't have to prove you're innocent.
And that is the single hardest thing for people to grasp, because the letters are designed to make you feel guilty until proven innocent. They imply that if you haven't bought a license, well, you must be breaking the law.
They do. But legally, that assumption is, well, it's meaningless. Think of it like this. They can't just send a letter saying, we suspect you're watching live TV. They have to have admissible, concrete evidence, like a legally obtained confession or some kind of verifiable data. Without that evidence of live TV use or BBC iPlayer use, no offense is established. Your address just being on their database is not evidence.
Okay, that has huge implications for when an enforcement officer actually turns up at the door. Let's tackle the biggest fear: powers of entry. Can they just force their way in?
Unequivocally, no. TV licensing officers do not, I repeat, do not possess automatic powers of entry. They are not police officers. They cannot just enter your home.
So what are the only two ways they can legally get inside?
The first is the most common, and it's totally voluntary. You give them explicit, unambiguous consent. You have to invite them in.
Right, and the second?
The second is much rarer, and it's a formal legal process. The officer has to have obtained a magistrate's court warrant under Section 366 of the Communications Act.
That sounds like a pretty high legal bar. They can't just, pop down to the court and get one, can they?
Oh, no. It's subject to rigorous judicial scrutiny. A magistrate has to be presented with compelling, reasonable grounds to suspect an offense is actually being committed. It loops right back to the burden of proof. If they have no evidence, they have no basis to even ask for a warrant. If they had the evidence, they wouldn't need to ask to come in.
So what if someone refuses entry? That's a big fear. That saying no makes you look guilty. Does that count as evidence?
Absolutely not. The sources confirm that refusing entry is completely lawful. And, crucially, that refusal cannot be used by TV licensing as evidence an offense is being committed, nor can it be used as grounds to then go and get a warrant. It is your legal right.
That is genuinely empowering. So, to sum up your rights in that situation, you are not legally required to invite them in. You're not required to answer their questions. You don't have to fill out their forms or reply to their letters.
That is the crux of it. The lack of any obligation to engage is your strongest legal position. Because, frankly, engaging voluntarily is often the only way they get the evidence they need for a prosecution. Either you say something you shouldn't, or you let them in.
Let's pivot to the source of all this anxiety.
Yeah.
The mail itself. The letters feel like a psychological weapon, using phrases like official investigation or final notice.
And it's so important for you to internalize what this correspondence actually is. It is automated marketing. It's sent to a physical address based on an assumption, usually that the address doesn't have a license. These letters do not, I repeat, do not constitute evidence of an active, human-led investigation.
We all know the language escalates. Can you sort of walk us through that cycle? How does it go from a polite reminder to a high-stakes summons warning?
It's just a sequence, an algorithm. You might start with a soft introductory letter. No response. The tone hardens. The next one might be an advisory visit letter, implying someone's about to call. Then it progresses to the final notice, which is designed to look very official, maybe with graphics suggesting a court summons is on its way. But the escalation is just the system cycling through templates because an address is still on the unlicensed list, not because a solicitor has actually reviewed your file.
So it's not personal. If the language is threatening prosecution, it's just because the automated system has reached threat level red.
Precisely. The escalating language does not mean actual legal proceedings are being initiated. It's a systematic attempt to get you to pay up through intimidation.
Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the legal risk can actually shift away from you and back onto the enforcement body itself. What happens if this systematic, aggressive communication oversteps and causes genuine, persistent distress?
This is where we look beyond the Communications Act and into consumer protection law. Because TV licensing is, in effect, acting like a commercial debt collector, they have to stick to standards of fair trading. If their letters misrepresent your legal obligations or imply guilt without any evidence or cause undue alarm with these high-pressure tactics, they can be challenged.
Under what specific regulations?
Primarily, the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008. This prevents misleading commercial practices. If they're aggressively chasing people who are legally exempt and have no evidence to think otherwise, that could be seen as an unfair practice designed to force payment.
And what about harassment? The Protection from Harassment Act 1997. That sounds serious for just getting mail.
It is, but it's subject to legal tests. If the volume, the tone, and the persistence of the letters are aggressive and distressing enough, it could, hypothetically, meet the legal threshold for harassment. A court would look at the cumulative effect. Did it cause you genuine alarm and distress? And did the organization have a reasonable excuse for such persistent contact? Given they often send these letters without any reasonable grounds to suspect an offense, their defense might be, well, a little shaky.
That's a fascinating thought. The very tool they use for compliance, the scary automated letter, could be their biggest legal weakness.
Exactly. This knowledge is all about turning that anxiety into legal confidence. So before we get to remedies, let's just synthesize the 3 core protective principles you should walk away with.
Okay, let's do it. Principle 1, protection through definition. A license isn't required unless you watch live TV or use BBC iPlayer. If you're only on Netflix, Prime, whatever, you are legally safe.
Perfect. Principle 2, protection through non-engagement. You have absolutely no legal duty to interact with TV licensing. No need to prove your innocence, answer their questions, or fill out their forms. Silence is your right.
And principle 3, protection through property rights. You can lawfully refuse entry, and any enforcement action needs genuine, admissible evidence of wrongdoing, not just threats based on the absence of a license.
An excellent summary. Now, if you feel you have been unfairly targeted or genuinely harassed by this correspondence, you don't just have to put up with it. There are formal avenues for recourse.
So where do you start? The official channels.
The first step is usually internal. Submit a formal complaint directly to TV licensing, detailing why the communication is misleading or distressing. If you don't get a satisfactory response, you can escalate that to the BBC Executive Complaints Unit.
But the more powerful route, especially given it's all automated, is probably the data protection one, isn't it?
Wow.
Challenging the very basis on which they keep contacting you.
Absolutely. We'd recommend raising a data protection challenge under UK GDPR and the Data Protection Act 2018. This is key because they're processing your data, your address, to send you these letters. You're essentially asking them, on what lawful basis are you processing my personal data to repeatedly send me unfounded legal threats? Show me the evidence that justifies this.
That forces them to justify their process, rather than you having to justify your viewing habits. Has the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, ever looked into this?
The ICO has investigated the BBC and TV licensing's data handling in the past. While specific rulings on this kind of automated contact are rare, the threat of an ICO investigation can force an organization to audit its processes and stop unjustified contact. They have a legal duty to process data fairly.
And beyond the ICO, any other routes to escalate a problem?
You can complain to Ofcom, especially if the letters contain misleading information about broadcasting rules. And never underestimate contacting your local MP. If it's a matter of persistent distress, they can put real pressure on a public body or its agents on your behalf.
Finally, for that rare, high-pressure moment of an officer at the door, the source material gave a specific, legally concise statement. We should make sure our listener has that exact wording.
Yes, precision here really matters. The statement uses the correct legal language and removes any ambiguity. It is, I do not watch or record live television broadcasts, nor do I use BBC iPlayer. Accordingly, under Section 363 of the Communications Act 2003, no television license is required. I do not consent to entry or questioning. Please leave.
It's a short script, but it gives you back all the control. So what does this all mean? It means the intimidation factor of those letters is, well, it's manufactured, it's marketing. You now understand the incredibly strict legal limits on both the license requirement and their enforcement powers. You hold a legal advantage because the entire weight of proving a crime rests with them, not with you.
Which really raises an important question for us to think about. Given this reliance on aggressive, automated correspondence sent to thousands of addresses without any individual evidence, how does this enforcement strategy really balance the legitimate need for revenue collection with fundamental consumer protection and with our rights under GDPR for fair data handling and an end to persistent, targeted contact?
That tension between automated efficiency and our actual human rights is a challenge that isn't going away. Thank you so much for bringing in these crucial sources and letting us do this deep dive into your legal rights. Knowing the law turns fear into confidence.